All right. Welcome to the National Clinical Trial Registration Month panel discussion. Good afternoon. I am Keenan Austin. I'm Deputy Chief of Staff to Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who represents Florida's 24th Congressional District. And we're going to move right into the panel. Today's panelists, Dr. Salvatore Alesci from Takeda Pharmaceutical Company, Dr. Luther T. Clark, Global Director, Scientific, Medical, and Patient Perspective, Office of the Chief Medical Officer, Merck & Company. We have Dr. Naomi Lowy from the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, Food and Drug Administration. We have Dr. Albert Roy, Executive Director, Lupus Clinical Investigators Network, Alliance for Lupus Research. And then we also have Karen Brooks from Pfizer. She's an oncology therapeutic lead. So with that, we'll start with Dr. Salvatore Alesci. Please welcome him to the podium.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here about 1 year after the launch of the IMIN campaign and partnership with the National Minority Equality Forum. I'm sure that in this last year, a lot of things have changed in your life, personally, professionally. Certainly, I can tell you that a number of things have changed in my life on both ends. And in fact, I'm just transitioned to a very exciting role at Takeda, where I lead the global science policy. And what a great match for me to join a company that embraces diversity as one of its core values. One thing that has not changed, as you will hear, it's certainly my passion and my commitment to the cause that we all here are addressing and try to move the needle, which is really addressing the importance of participation in clinical trial. I didn't bring slides with me today. I just want to use the next 10-15 minutes to give sort of a brief overview of where we came from, where we are with IMIN, and where I hope we are going. Somehow to set the stage for some hopefully lively interaction later on, and give the opportunity to my colleagues here to speak in more details about some of their initiatives. IMIN really started with a reality check, with the realization that a number of things were changing in this country. And there are many of them that I'm not going to talk about, but there are three that were important to set the tone for IMIN. One was realizing that the demographic of our country were changing and continue to change significantly, so that those that we like to refer with minority, a term that I particularly didn't like, are becoming more and more the majority. The second change had to do with the continuously evolving healthcare landscape, where we are landing in a place where many more will have access to medical care, to treatment. A landscape where we are facing certainly with an evolving science that brings complexity with it, but it also brings opportunity, like more opportunities for personalized treatment, opportunity for a better understanding of the mechanism of disease. And the third one, and again these are all related, are the change that involve technology, with accessibility again to device, to tools, to application, that before was unprecedented. We tend to do a lot of things on our phone today that we were doing on a big desktop. So when we think about those changes, though, in our country, in other countries, there are certain things that have remained unchanged and remain a challenge. And to me, one of the biggest challenges that our country has been facing is the challenge that relates to developing innovative medicine in a way that is sustainable. And innovative treatment are not developed in isolation. They need patients, they need participants to be evaluated for their safety and efficacy. Participation in clinical trial has been lagging beyond all these changes, all the evolution, and all the technology. And that has been particularly dramatic in those communities that probably need the most this medicine. In those underrepresented communities, either because of race, ethnicity, or other social factors. Now, this becomes even more of an important issue at a time of transformation like the one that I described, where you're going to have more and more of these individuals getting access to this medicine, be exposed to this medicine, and hopefully developing a better understanding of this medicine. So, realizing what the lay of the land is, what we thought is how we can take this challenge, particularly in these communities, and almost kind of reverse the issue so that this becomes for us an opportunity. Or let me phrase it better, how we can really take the biodiversity of this country, which to me remains one of the greatest strengths, and make sure that we use all this technology and tools that we have now to address this long-standing problem of clinical trial participation. This was really what was behind the initial thinking of IMEAN. And the rest, at least for us as the industry, through the leadership of Pharma, the trade association, was how we can develop a framework that would allow us to speak with one voice on this issue, to be more proactive, and to do it in a way that is not done in isolation, but by partnering with other stakeholders in the ecosystem. And what came up during a number of discussions was a very simple framework that is based on the recognition that to really move the needle in this space, you need to address three main issues. One has to do with awareness about clinical trial. And awareness, as I highlighted before, it's a broad word. It means understanding of what a clinical trial is, where it is, what it entails to participate. The second one is the competency related to that, which includes the issue of literacy. It includes the issue of developing an understanding that goes beyond awareness. And the third one is that connectivity, recognizing that a solution to this problem requires to connect different dots in different groups, in different organizations. It cannot be just a push by a solo organization. So that was really the framework that eventually led to, as a first step, to a partnership between the industry, and this is unprecedented, the industry stepping up beyond what each company was doing and speaking with one voice and elevating this and making this a priority, and partner with the National Minority Equality Forum to launch the IMEAN campaign. A campaign aimed at building awareness, leading to increased participation in clinical trial. So that was about 1 year ago when the campaign was launched. Where are we now? And what we have achieved. I think if we ask different individuals, we'll probably hear different things, but there are some things that, in my mind, unequivocally represent important element of progress that we made. First of all, we went from an idea to a brand. We have a brand right now that speaks to the importance of participation of clinical trials. It doesn't matter what your race is, it doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is. We have a brand, we have a unified way of talking about participation in clinical trial under IMEAN. But as part of this effort, we also developed some important tools. With investment by Pharma and as well as the NMQF, we were able to build a portal which represents an entry point, and it's publicly available, to everybody who wants to learn more about clinical trials in simple ways. But that effort also led to the development of tools that could be used by different audience, again, to speak and to act in a unified and coherent way. Many of these tools, for example, are used by our industry, and I speak also for the company that I work for, but many other companies have recognized the value of using this in a day-to-day work. But some of them have become adopted also by patient advocacy organizations and other organizations. So we provide not just a framework, but we provide some tools to start educating and building awareness. In addition to these tools, the campaign has really touched already the lives of thousands of people through a series of events, through a series of articles and so on. But more important, we, as I speak, were able to have more than 50 committed champions to join the campaign, but join in a leadership position and evolving and bringing this message to the communities and back. And another piece that we just started building was what hopefully is going to become eventually a network of databases, a repository for information of individual that can create some sort of permanent infrastructure for clinical trial participation. Something that is very, very important and lacking in this country as well as in many other countries. So there is no question that some progress has been made, and that really required the work of a lot of people, some of which in this room, from pharma, from the member company. And I think it's important for us to recognize that. And I think it is important for the different audiences here outside the industry to also recognize that the industry step up on this. It just didn't talk the talk, but walk the walk, made this a priority internally. So where are we going from here, which I think is the important question. This was just the start. The industry and the trade association, in particular, has a role of catalyst. As I mentioned before, part of the spirit in this is the collaborative nature and the partnership that are needed to move to the next step. And I think in terms of talking about the next step, I want to use an example. Gary always like to say that I like to bring example. Before I brought examples from what's happening in Scotland with the healthcare system of Singapore and so on. But today I want to use an example of something that has happened in this country. And I'm bringing because I think it provides a very interesting parallel that should help us thinking about how we build the next phases of IMIN. And that example is the example of organ donation. Around the 70s is where there was a substantial progress in terms of the science. And I'm talking about surgery and medicine in organ transplant. So around 67, I believe, is where you have the first heart transplant, both in the United States and South Africa, and so on. That scientific, or if you want, medical development really drove the attention, the national attention around this topic. And like I said before, with the scientific evolution, now you're able to do transplant became a challenge. The challenge of needing organ for this transplant. And the stigmata behind that, right? Similar to the stigmata that you have in some of this population behind clinical trial. Somebody is going to come and chop my liver when I'm alive and give it to somebody else. That was a pretty scary time and certainly a major obstacle. What you saw in that case is that there was a substantial backup by the healthcare system in the United States to take advantage of this opportunity and to start building awareness around organ donation with campaign. And the campaign eventually led to creation of databases, of biobanks, to the point that everybody on his driving license has a little heart, just as an indication of what should be a right, the right to decide if you want to give your organ or not after your death. I don't see why this problem that we are facing can be approached the same way. I think the industry made a priority. different organizations have made a priority. But there is still a lot of things that need to be done, even with this progress. And some of these things are like as simple as better defined race and ethnicity in terms of category. And this requires the industry working with the regulators, working with other organizations, because what we have perhaps is not as relevant as it should be. This implies perhaps looking at current policy that we have and revisit policy that related the ability that we have about talking about data in different populations with healthcare professionals. We all know in this room that the major challenge in securing participation is clinical trials. Most patients don't hear about that from the healthcare profession. Guess what? Most healthcare professionals don't hear from those that do the trials because of current regulations. Something to keep in mind. The need to have new policy that incentivize time by physicians devoted to be clinical trial investigator, particularly in diversity. Policy that protect their time for that incentivize education in this phase. So there are certainly ideas that we can pursue and we can push forward to really achieve the next stage of transformation without forgetting that still we need to continue to build that awareness in the community, because this starts from the communities. We need to make sure that that awareness translates into participation. And we need to do this in a partnership way. Some progress has already been made along these lines. For example, for the first time, May 5th to May 8th, we are going to have our clinical trial awareness week. Again, major role played by pharma as a member of the Clinical Trial Coalition. We are going to have an AWARE event on the 5th, sponsored by CScript. But I don't see why that Clinical Trial Awareness Week can become a Clinical Trial Awareness Month or year. Same way that we saw happen in 2003 when Tommy Thompson just declared April month of organ life donation. So incremental step, but we need to really make progress in this. So my call here, last year I came with a call for champions, and for people that were willing to take the lead to make it a priority in each organization. And I think that we started the process. We should continue. We should not lose momentum. But my call this year is to really make, a national priority, to make participation to clinical trial a national priority and call on everybody here to do that and to push that. And I don't see why not. I don't see why something that has implication on public health, that can really address disparities, that can help the country maintaining its leadership in biomedical science, and that can really improve the economy of the country, can be a national priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I'd like to thank Dr. Puckrin and the organizers for inviting me to be a part of this summit. I'm going to speak to you about patient engagement across the drug discovery and development continuum. And I'd like to speak briefly on four topics as part of this. One, a few comments on framing the issue, the benefits of engagement and the costs of non-engaging patients, patient-inspired innovation, and also leave you with a few thoughts about drug discovery, about patient engagement beyond drug discovery and development. Now, patient engagement in research and development is gaining momentum as a way to improve healthcare outcomes. This is no longer a concept. This is something that's really happening. Patient input has become increasingly recognized as just as important to improving healthcare as engagement post-approval, where we already have quite a track record. It's important to keep in mind that patients have a greater stake. They have increased access to information. There's greater transparency of clinical trial clinical trial data, and results, and the economics of the relationship has also changed. And importantly, the FDA and other stakeholders, including industry, academia, and others, are becoming and beginning more and more efforts to engage patients early in the process with the objectives of meeting the needs of patients and also capturing information that's relevant to patient values and their preferences. Now, there are a number of opportunities to engage patients during the process of drug discovery and development, and bidirectional exchange does influence each stage of the product life cycle. And I've listed here some of the benefits that we can expect. In the discovery preclinical phase, of course, understanding the unmet need, as well as informing the treatment design. During the clinical development phase, designing protocols and optimizing recruitment and retention, patient adherence are all important and can be influenced by patient engagement, as well as selecting endpoints that are meaningful to patients. And then, of course, at the approval stage, contributing to decisions on licensure and labeling indications. Now, post-approval of a new therapy and during the time before and after patent expiry and beyond, there are a number of things that we benefit from when we engage our patients. Developing the packaging, the labeling, the medication guides, making them more health literate. Those are things that are all important. Supporting our efforts to obtain our reimbursement and access, facilitating adherence with therapy, contributing to our discussion and analysis of the risk-benefit profile, as well as informing public policy. But there are a number of barriers and challenges to doing this, so it's not easy. First of all, there's no common definition of what meaningful patient engagement is. It can be costly. There's a lack of defined metrics. The current organizational cultures within our companies need to change to facilitate this. There are regulatory restrictions as to how one might communicate with patients, particularly about specific products. And there's often the need to engage third parties to facilitate our engagement and our communication. And then lastly, there's the potential for legal risk. But as many and as important as the challenges and barriers are, there are consequences of not engaging patients. And these can be thought of in a number of ways, but one way to think about it is in the opportunity costs that we bear if we don't engage patients. And some examples of these are listed here. If we don't engage patients, we may fail to realize some of the greater efficiencies in recruitment and retention and in the patient experience or the participant experience during our clinical trials. We may make wrong choices, and there's some examples of this in pharma. We may waste a lot of effort pursuing the wrong target or going down the wrong path. There may be gaps in understanding on the part of patients and also a number of missed opportunities for education. And these gaps in understanding can also lead to gaps in trust, which we know is very important as we think about clinical trials. Now, PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, recently developed an engagement rubric. And this engagement rubric is a tool that provides guidance to researchers on ways to engage patients, family members, caregivers, and patient groups throughout the research process, during the planning of the study, the conducting of the study, and disseminating the study results. And while we all recognize that PCORI is primarily focused on comparative effectiveness research, the learnings which come from their efforts about how to engage patients have the potential of being more broadly applied, and we're particularly interested in what the implications of their findings might be for a drug discovery and development. Now, just a couple of comments about what we're doing at Merck. At Merck, we're approaching this from the perspective of what we're calling a patient-inspired innovation. And it's an early process, so at this point, what we're doing mainly is listening, learning, and collaborating with experts, such as some of you in the room here, expert groups, patients in all sectors. And these initiatives are championed in that part of the company that I reside in, the Office of the Chief Medical Officer. And I thought I'd just share with you some of the responsibilities of the Chief Medical Officer at Merck to put this in perspective. And these include enhancing corporate responsibility, reputation, and transparency by focusing on the patient, contributing to assessments of patient safety, championing, enabling a Merck strategy of patient-inspired innovation, facilitating access to our medications, both those that have been approved and those that might not have yet been approved, addressing the issues of healthcare disparities and clinical trial diversity, and promoting health literacy and treatment adherence. And some of the guiding principles that we're using are listed here, and these include that the patient and caregiver should be at the center of our decision making, that the opportunity to innovate is more profoundly impacted by listening to patients and caregivers in addition to healthcare providers. So historically, we've gotten this information about patients through their providers and others. And that the patient's perspective and the bidirectional exchange, and we emphasize the bidirectional exchange, is critical to sustain innovation from discovery right through commercialization. And it's also important to keep in mind that there are no average patients. Each patient is unique, and we need to engage a wide range of patients, and we need to use their perspectives and experiences in refining our strategic decisions. And as one patient said to us, nothing about me without me. So the patients do want to be involved. Another consideration at Merck is that we do appreciate the linkage between health literacy, clinical trial diversity, patient engagement, and drug development. So that bidirectional interactions and exchange with patients throughout the continuum makes communications with our patients more relevant and impactful. And one of the greatest barriers to patient engagement across the continuum is communicating with patients. And much of this can be described under the umbrella of health literacy. So the application of the principles of health literacy are very important to patient engagement strategies and innovations. And improved health literacy can be an important enabler of more diverse participant recruitment, retention, comprehension, adherence, and experience in clinical trials. And also, it's important that we collaborate and that we collaborate globally. This slide lists a number of our current collaborations in terms of returning results of clinical trials to patients with Harvard, improving the informed consent process. We're working with Duke on that. We work with the FDA on improving the health literacy of our patient medication guides. And important to this audience, our patient engagement efforts in diversity and U.S. U.S. clinical trials, our collaborations with the National Minority Quality Forum, the Association of Black Cardiologists, and the American Heart Association, and there are a few others there as well. So beyond drug development, there are multiple interfaces. Patients, of course, are interested in which treatment is best for me, how does my doctor and health system perform comparatively. Insurers tend to be interested in understanding the cost effectiveness of various approaches. Regulatory and reimbursement authorities, of course, are very interested in patient perspectives, and these are formally sought out at the time of registration and reimbursement decisions. And of course, pharmaceutical companies very interested in how our drugs fit into clinical practices, the comparative safety and effectiveness, value, benefit, and risk perspectives from patients. So let me finish with just a couple of points, and this is a quote that appeared in the current issue of BioCentury from Janet Woodcock, who's the director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the FDA, a comment which she made at one of the agency workshops early this month, in which she stated that it turns out that what is really bothering the patient and what is really bothering the doctor can be radically different things. And you won't know what's bothering the patient if you don't speak to them and if you don't get that information from them. And ultimately, our goals are an end-to-end global bidirectional engagement with patients and their caregivers to optimize and realize greater innovation and efficiency, and in all cases putting the individual patient and caregiver at the center of our decision making. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Clark, for that perfect segue into my presentation. Dr. Woodcock is my boss's boss, so that's perfect. May I have my slides up, please? I am not John White, as is listed in the papers. I am neither Karen Brooks. My name is Naomi Lowy. I'm an endocrinologist. I am with the FDA's Professional Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement. John White leads our group. He could not be here today. But as the lead for the Drug Trial Snapshots Initiative, I'm very, very happy to be here to discuss this initiative with you today. This initiative makes minority demographic data more available and transparent, and is a very important step in ensuring that all populations are acknowledged during the drug development process. It's very easy to get lost in all the offices and divisions within FDA, but just to give you a little bit of an idea of where we sit, PACE, Professional Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement, sits in the office of the Center Director, Janet Woodcock, within the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which is also known as CDER. PACE has 3 general teams, and now that we have been tasked with the Drug Trial Snapshots Initiative, we will be forming a 4th team. Just very basically, PACE's mission is to establish relationships with various CDER stakeholders in order to enhance two-way communication, provide a focal point for advocacy, and establish measures, processes, and outcomes to assess effectiveness of CDER initiatives. The stakeholders that PACE engages include healthcare professionals and societies, patients and patient advocates, health plans and insurers, and state and federal regulatory bodies. I wanted to introduce drug trial snapshots with an advertising throwback, and Vital was already discussed earlier this afternoon. So as you know, it's a blood pressure drug that was approved in 2005 and is indicated for the treatment of hypertension in African Americans, and it was the first drug to be approved for a specific race. And because of that, it really put the spotlight on how a drug may act differently in different people, in different races, and in different genders. Why do drugs act differently in different groups? This is a figure that offers some of the potential explanations to these important questions. I won't go through all of these, but they are available on the slides. And it's important to know how FDA addresses these potential differences among racial groups. And the next slides challenge what you know about FDA's regulatory requirements. So true or false? There is a regulatory requirement for companies to include patients of different races as participants in clinical trials. That's false. There's a regulatory requirement that new drug applications include analyses of safety and effectiveness by demographic subgroups. This is true, and whatever data regarding subgroups is submitted to us, FDA is required to look at this data and analyze it. And finally, true or false, Congress mandated that FDA provide a report addressing demographic subgroups in clinical trials. This is true, and this led to drug trial snapshots, which I will now explain in greater detail. So the roots of drug trial snapshots are in the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act of 2012, known as FDASIA, and specifically Section 907. And your own Dr. Puckrin offered some very nice comments about the 907 action plan on the NMQF website. This mandate was a response to concerns from groups representing racial minorities and women, and with it, FDA was directed to publish and provide Congress with a report that addressed demographic subgroups. The subgroups include those from different sexes, races, age groups, and ethnicities. This congressional mandate led FDA to come up with an action plan to enhance the collection and availability of subgroup data, and the plan includes three main priorities: the quality of data generated in clinical trials, greater participation of minority groups in clinical trials, and increased transparency. And it is this third priority for which our group is responsible. What does it mean? The goal here is to make the demographic subgroup data more available to the public, and therefore the main action from the plan is to post demographic information from pivotal trials for newly approved drugs and biologics. The vital questions we are tasked with answering are, number one, what is the extent of clinical participation by demographic subgroups? So simply put, who was in the important trials? How many women, how many African Americans, how many above the age of 65 years? And secondly, what is the extent of safety and effectiveness data by demographic subgroups? So do we know if a drug worked better in whites versus Asians? Do we know if a certain side effect was more pronounced in men compared to women? Snapshots aims to answer these questions. And although this information is typically included in applications, FDA was tasked with bringing this information out of the applications. As Dr. Woodcock says, we try to lift the veil off this information out of the medical and the statistical reviews that FDA generates, and making this all easily available to the public. To give you an idea of what we've done so far, we started out in the fall with the pilot Snapshots project. We had a period of public comments which were crucial in helping us understand what stakeholders wanted through this initiative. And going forward, from January 1st, 2015, we are publishing a snapshot for every new approved drug and biologic. Where can you find this information? Here is our website, which is continuously undergoing improvements to make it more consumer-friendly. At the bottom of the homepage, there is a list of all published snapshots. And with each new drug approval, the list is continuously expanding. I looked at it this morning, and I believe we are close to 20. This is the first page of a sample snapshot. This one is for a drug approved for multiple myeloma. All snapshots are written in language targeting consumers at an 8th grade level. However, there are links throughout the snapshot which lead to more information, which provide more detailed data and analyses which are really geared for physicians and experts. One of the highlights are the demographics of the pivotal clinical trials, and this is something that the public has expressed to us that they really appreciate. This is taken from the FARADAC snapshot and summarizes the number and percentage of patients by race who were in the trial. So here, of the 193 patients in the pivotal trial, 63% were white, 32% were Asian, 3% were African American. Here's another chart from a drug called Savasa, which is a blood thinner. These trials were much bigger, with about 11,000 patients. And again, the majority of participants were white, and only 1.3% were African American, and approximately 14% were Asian. Acknowledging that some of these numbers appear very low, the question, which I will revisit, is what are the right numbers? How many patients in each race group should be represented to ensure that the drug is safe and effective in all races? And this is not an easy question to answer. I also want to show you that snapshots provide these charts for gender and age groups. Here again for Savesa, we can quickly see that 62% of participants were male and 38% were female. Again, are these percentages sufficient? The other highlight of snapshots is the statements of whether the drug worked better in one subgroup versus another. And here are some statements taken from actual snapshots. Savesa was similarly effective in men and women. The number of non-white patients was limited. Therefore, differences in response to Natpara between white and non-white patients could not be determined. And Faradak was similarly effective in patients above and below age 65. Snapshots also asks if side effects were observed more in one subgroup compared to another. And here are some statements I pulled from published snapshots. I won't go through all of them. The next slides give you a big picture idea of what snapshots immediately provide and how they guide us in the intermediate and long term. In the short term, snapshots provide a quick and clear glimpse into who is in the clinical trials and whether there were differences in safety and efficacy among subgroups. They are one tool for physicians and patients, and they are not intended to replace prescribing information or the label. Snapshots also provide consumer-friendly information about the drug and the trials that supported the FDA approval. Snapshots also generate bigger questions, which we are discussing and we strive to answer. They ignite the discussion of why the percentages of patients matter and when does it matter. Are these analyses relevant for every trial and for every drug? What are the numbers required for proper statistical analysis of subgroups? And finally, how can we recruit more minority subgroups into trials? We hope to answer these questions through several means, including collaboration with internal and external colleagues, including clinicians, statisticians, and epidemiologists. Our group is also planning a scientific conference to get to the heart of these issues. We also value feedback from stakeholders, including you. We have made many changes to snapshots and to the website following feedback from the public. I'd like to end with a surprising link between Barbara Streisand and snapshots. Ms. Streisand has been a vocal supporter of particularly gender equality in health, and just 2 weeks ago she wrote an opinion piece for the Washington Post and mentioned our initiative. She said, "The Food and Drug Administration's new online drug trial snapshots reveal the persistent gender and racial imbalances in pharmaceutical trials. I hope these revelations will spark changes in how products and devices are approved." I thank you very much for your attention. I actually have a flight to catch, so I don't know that I'll be able to stay for the panel, unfortunately. We ran a little bit over, but please feel free to email me with any questions or call me with any questions that you may have. Thank you very much. Is that okay? I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Well, good afternoon. I just wanted to start by thanking Dr. Puckrin for inviting me here today to talk a little bit about my organization and an initiative that's fairly new that I think dovetails nicely with what this summit's trying to accomplish. So just a little bit about the Alliance for Lupus Research. The ALR was founded in 1999 by Robert Wood Johnson IV. Woody, as he's known, is, two claims to fame. First, his great-grandfather founded Johnson & Johnson, and his second claim to fame is he's the owner of the New York Jets. And Woody founded the ALR after his daughter was diagnosed about 16 years ago with lupus. And currently the ALR is the largest private funder of lupus research in the world, with upwards of $100 million committed to advancing lupus research. Our mission of the ALR is really to prevent, treat, and cure systemic lupus erythematosus, otherwise known as lupus or SLE, by supporting biomedical research. lupus. There's a number of unfortunate truths with it, but lupus is a chronic, potentially fatal autoimmune disease. Rather than protect against infection, your immune system essentially attacks its own tissues. It's an equal opportunity wrecking ball, and that it goes after the kidneys, the brain, the heart, the lungs, the blood, the skin, and the joints. Unlike cancer, where you don't have an active enough immune system, in lupus, it's overreactive. And there is no known cause currently for lupus. Approximately 1.5 million people in America have lupus. 9 out of 10 are women, and African American women are 3 times more at risk for developing lupus. And there is no cure for lupus. So I think it's there's a high probability that many of you either attending this summit or in this room know someone who has lupus. One thing that's clear is there's really a critical need for better treatments in this disease space. Unfortunately, there's only been one new drug approved in the last 54 years, and that's Benlysta through GSK. There is, some belief that it doesn't work well in the African American population. They're doing some post-marketing data analysis now on that, but really only one new drug, and it's really unfortunate. And the treatments that people get today with lupus only provide temporary relief. In many instances, they cause significant and dangerous debilitating side effects. The cocktail typically is a combination of immune suppressants, chemotherapy agents, and high-dose steroids. So recognizing this challenge, the ALR, Woody, in his vision, really thought about, are there models out there? What role can a patient advocacy committee play in advancing and accelerating new treatment options for lupus patients? And there are models. There's a lot of great models. Probably the best model is the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, right up the road here in Bethesda. Patient advocacy organizations are poised and positioned very well to actually serve and engage their patient community to get involved. They can act as strategic partners by de-risking some of the drug development work. And they have a very close relationship with the clinical investigators at the sites who are actually seeing the lupus patients by virtue of their relationships with them and funding their research in many cases. So seeing this opportunity, ALR is in the midst now of a new program. And we thought about what's the quickest, most cost-effective, and expeditious, and maybe even more safest way to actually bring new drugs and be tested within the lupus community. And what we looked at was, we looked at all FDA-approved medicines for the 6,800 indications that are in the Orange Book. And of those, we identified through kind of a panel of experts and some of the greatest lupus researchers that we know across the world, 157 drug candidates that are really approved for other diseases, but actually may have some efficacy in lupus based on their mechanism of action. And so we went through a very laborious and tedious scientific and vetting process, a priority process, and scored these compounds. And have moved that forward now into some discussions with some of my colleagues here at this meeting, as well as some others. And we're very excited that there's some interest that resonates within industry to work with us and partner with us on repositioning or repurposing these drugs. And not only did we find our primary goal was to look at drugs that are already approved that could be repurposed or repositioned, but also drugs that are in development now for maybe psoriasis or other autoimmune diseases. They've actually thought about repositioning them currently in development for another indication. So that became a secondary objective, an endpoint that we've gotten out of this initiative to date. Well, we've got some great candidates that we want to pursue. We've got some interest from industry, but now we need to be able to execute on conducting these clinical trials. And so the value add that we have is we wanted to establish, and we are establishing, a lupus clinical trial network. And the goal of this network is to create a cohesive and interactive group of academic lupus investigators to carry out small, focused proof-of-concept trials in a comprehensive and expeditious manner. These are not intended to be regulatory trials. We simply want to have patients, 50 to 100, in a small proof-of-concept trial that we can find out and give industry enough data to give it a signal whether or not it's a go or no-go into a more larger phase 2 regulatory trial. And so we are in the process now of engaging some of our closest friends in the US and Canada, large academic centers, clinical investigators that have large cohorts of patients, to actually conduct these clinical trials, whether they're sponsored by the ALR or they're sponsored by industry, to actually to do this work. Our commitment is to support the institutions from the infrastructure perspective, support the time of the investigator, the research coordinator, the nurse, the pharmacy, and so on and so forth, as far as the institutional infrastructure. And we're actually in the process now of actually doing our site feasibility and verification process, and we hope to have our first clinical trial going through Lucin within the fourth quarter of 2015, which is, we think, is just going to be terrific. I'd be remiss to say that there are a number of challenges. There are a number of challenges in enrolling patients in clinical trials, period, but there's particularly a number of challenges in enrolling patients in lupus clinical trials by virtue of the population that it affects. And so here are some challenges here that I've highlighted, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're trying to address these challenges. The lupus studies are always carried out globally. And they go to Moldova, they go here, there, or everywhere, and often what you get is you get best practices not followed. To diagnose lupus is very, very difficult. It's particularly difficult when you go to some of these other countries. Study recruitment is very difficult, and you can produce a lot of noise in your clinical trials. And a lot of trials, unfortunately, in lupus, some large phase 3 trials have failed. It's difficult to recruit within the African American population, and we really need to build patients' trust. So what we thought about kind of putting together with Lucin within this initiative is really a program that would do a number of things, but primarily break down the patient-centric barriers to enrollment in lupus clinical trials. And we call this the Patients Advocates for Lupus Studies, or our PALS program. And really what this is to identify a patient advocate at our institutions, a person that has lupus, to really help through kind of a planned, organized learning experience to work with the healthcare team, to engage with the lupus patients, to kind of increase the knowledge of the disease, to increase the knowledge regarding the benefits of participating in a clinical trial, really being an active member of that healthcare team, and being an active advocate and resource for patients going forward. What I would say is that I don't think it's a coincidence that when you look at other diseases, particularly where I have some experience in pediatric cancer, that when patients, pediatric cancer patients are diagnosed with cancer, upwards of 60% of them get enrolled on a clinical trial. And I think there's a direct correlation that survival rates for pediatric cancer are in excess of 80%. So I think there's a direct correlation of being active in a clinical trial and outcome. And so I think it's important, and one way of doing it, we believe, is to have this program available at our academic sites to foster enrollment onto clinical trials. The last thing I'll say is, the ALR has a very active multicultural outreach task force. We are in the midst of building it out, particularly around this initiative. We are open to and would welcome any participation from anyone in this room, because I think we've got a lot of exciting things going forward this year and beyond. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to talk to you a little while afterwards, after this breaks, before I head back up to New York. So thank you.
Well, I will definitely try to be brief because we are definitely over, and I was added, so I'm honored though. Thank you, Dr. Pucker, for allowing me to present today. My name is Karen Brooks, and I'm with Pfizer, and I'm basically going to talk to you briefly about the diversity in clinical trials at Pfizer and what we're doing. So basically, our platform has been set on a stage concept of what we're doing internally, what are our tools, what is our execution, and how we've taken that to the external environment. So internal activities, you would be surprised. A lot of times people think that people that are in the drug development process would understand that there needs to be diversity in clinical trials. But interestingly, and I think there were some people here earlier that were from other companies, but I'm sure that people from Merck and some other companies can probably attest that we work with people that when we bring this topic to them, clinicians and other people in the industry, they did not truly understand the need for diversity in clinical trials. Maybe not be knowledgeable of that. So having been in the industry for 23 years and having worked at a site as a study coordinator, working as a CRA in the CRO, working at Sanofi as well as Pfizer, I have had the opportunity to be with people who truly did not understand that diversity in clinical trials is something that is needed and something that need to be educated on. So while we educate people in the industry, we have to think about, wow, they're really not where we need to be. So we are developing tools and diversity champions at Pfizer. So we're trying to make sure that the people, that everyone is touching a clinical trial, that they understand the importance, because before we can go out in the community and have that process to be able to work, we got to make sure the people that are developing the protocols, that are doing the clinical research, truly can embrace that and understand the need. We're also educating our project teams with what the disparity process is that going on. You know, as you were mentioning, my prior colleague in reference to lupus, it's amazing. A lot of people didn't know about the situation of the things that went on with Benlysta and the post-marketing commitment. And so when you start to educate people in that, then their eyes open up and they realize, how does that impact me as a clinician, as I write a protocol? So that's very important for us. And last but not least, we want to operationalize that diversity. So here at Pfizer, what we're doing is we're trying to give them the tools that they need to do, and starting off when they write their protocols, that there is a part that they must focus on the diversity. So there's a section in there that they have to consider, is there a disparity in this indication that I need to be focused on when I am looking for inclusiveness in this trial? The tools and resources at the program level, the project team level, and the site tools level. So as I mentioned, I had started 23 years in the industry, and I did start when I was 5, just in case you was wondering. The thought that I was thinking about is something that Dr. Frida Lewis Hall said to me. This is not a new topic. I'm sure some of you in this room have heard about this topic for years. And she said, the reason why this is not a new topic, because we're trying to solve Star Wars problems with Flintstones tools. And I was like, that's probably about what we're doing, because we continue to say the same thing over and over. We continue to put ourselves in the same situation instead of to think innovatively. And we're going to talk about that today before I leave too, especially with the I'm In campaign, because I'm such a big champion of that. So in the program level, we want to ensure diversity, inclusion in the clinical trial development plans. So as we had that process that I talked about, what we're doing is that everyone is thinking about it. I have my protocol in front of me. I now need to think about the inclusiveness of those who are going to be in that trial. We're also developing tools to assess the populations at a disparity by indication. So we had the opportunity to work with a group of a group of project teams from a graduate school that we're collaborating with, and to develop us with a playbook that our clinicians can utilize. Next but not least, we're working with our project teams. And so we're engaging with minority serving sites. As we work with the National Minority Quality Forum and other institutions, we recognize that, you know, we need to have, not only do we need minority investigators, but we need to have non-minority investigators that have that minority population and access to those patients. And we're communicating with sites and developing awareness. So we're providing that education. And last but not least, we're providing them with tools. Because it's one thing to say, we need for you to work with us or to collaborate with us in diversity in clinical trials, but they're like, what can we use? What can we do? So we've developed a couple of tools that we're providing to our investigative sites, and we're trying to break down the barriers. We're thinking about the financial strain that may be on the site. I know a lot of sites say, you know, I would like to do more advertisement or more things for travel access for patients. What's going to cost more money? What can we do? So we try to sit down with our sites and have that type of discussion with them, because we feel like that's very important. But last but not least, we'd like to have them talk about the I'm In campaign. I think that's probably one of the wonderful things that I like. You know, I always tell people with the I'm In campaign, and I know you're not going to do it, but how many in this room are on Facebook? Raise your hand. Now, a lot of people are around my age, 45 and up, we're supposed to be high on Facebook, so I'm expecting some hands up. But if you are on Facebook, you can go and you can join I'm In, and you can be right there. That can make a difference. So it's on my wall. It's on my wall, and so all of the friends that I'm friends with, they're now joining I'm In. You have to be, it has to start with us. It has to be with the people in this room, and as we take that and take it to the next level, that's what's needed. And it's very important, because like I tell people, we always hear knowledge is power. That's a great quote, knowledge is power. But really the quote should say knowledge is power, but it's really the application of knowledge that's powerful. Because if we're a room of people that know something, but we don't apply it, then it's not powerful. So I try to get people to think not only is knowledge powerful, but it's the application of knowledge is powerful. How many times you tell your children know they should clean their room, but until they clean it, it does us no good. So that's how that's why I want people to think about that application process. Execution of diversity in our programs. One thing that I think is very important is that we try to identify the programs that are in need. Some studies, there are situations where acute lymphocytic leukemia might really have a disparity, might not even be a need for diversity. It might not be something that needs to be focused, but there are certain areas such as lupus, such as multiple myeloma, where that is something that is a need. And so we have to identify the right programs. And then we develop a diversity recruitment plan with our teams and we help them. Because again, like I said, not everybody that's at the table that's developing that program truly understand what that need might be. And last but not least, we conduct lessons learned. I always feel about cross-pollinating, and I hate to do something over. So if one team knows how to do something and has been a success, we try to take that to the next team. External engagement. I think this is probably the greatest piece that I've had the most fun with. This is where we have the opportunity to be out in our community. And it's really important for us to work with every person that we touch, for that they truly understand what a clinical trial is, what diversity in clinical trial is, and how participating in clinical trial can be a benefit. Yes, is there a risk? But that's true, but educating people. So we educate on all levels. We have been at conferences with healthcare providers such as nurses, all different types of healthcare providers who don't really truly understand what a healthcare provider's role is in clinical trials. And that might be because they truly didn't get that education in their clinical training. So what I think as the industry, patient advocates, is that we be the ones that be the voice to go out there and say, hey, do you know what a clinical trial is? You know, and that's how we break down any type of barriers that have occurred, is that we be a part of that voice. And it's real important, and that's when you have that call to action. So I'm calling to action for all of you in the room that is on Facebook and every other social media. Take the chance to go and join I'm In. If you can't, if you feel like I just can't do that, I'm gonna call again. Try. Be a part of the action. Finding clinical trials is another piece I think is real important. And while Pfizer's not the only company that's done this, I was just kind of focus on it. But as some of you know, we have clinicaltrials.gov. And definitely an informative source for all clinical trials that's out there. But one piece that I thought was very interesting is that we thought that for Pfizer's, where's all of our trials somewhere and centrally located? So we developed a Find a Trial at Pfizer. It's a website that you can go to. It's a lot easier accessible to resource and search. And I think it's a great tool for patients and patient advocates, as well as physicians and healthcare providers. Again, we're not the only organization to do it. I think a lot of other biopharma companies has developed their websites, and I think it's a great tool because I think it's important for our pharma companies, our biopharma companies, to come together to make sure that we have clinical trials accessible to everyone that's involved, to have the opportunity to make a change. It's not going to happen by itself. It's going to take each and every one of us to think about what can we do in this process. So again, I gave you a call to action. I'm hoping that you try it. Gary, I want you to tell me that we've got more followers by the end of the meeting, and thank you so much for having me.
Let's give another round of applause to all of our panelists today. Did everybody take out your phone and go to Facebook, click I'm In? You can do it now if you want to. Perfect. I like that call to action. Do we have any questions? We have microphones here to left, right, center. Do we have any questions that we like to ask our esteemed panelists today? Is it after lunchtime? Let me just get the ball rolling with a question. What are some of the, and this is to any of our panelists that would like to take it, we talked a lot about external engagement and how to reach historically underrepresented communities. What are some of the models of success that you've seen? Because we've had a lot of good solutions, and I hope that our tools are going into the Star Wars age now from the Flintstones. What are some of the models of success that you all have seen? Dr. Clark, you can take it.
Sure. Well, this on?
Sure.
I think one of the challenges, of course, is that the models that are out there, even those that have been successful, have not been successful enough. And I think, too, there are really several levels. One of the things that we realized as we started to look into this more is that often patients have not, or participants have not agreed because they have not been asked. So there are some barriers that represent low-hanging fruit. So one is, the process of educating patients to what clinical trials are, why they're important, and asking them to participate. But it doesn't stop at the participant or the patient, because we know that there are often providers who feel the same way, and they're often a barrier themselves. So one of the areas that I would say we've recognized as being successful is reaching out to those who have diverse patient populations in their panel and getting them involved, because we know that if you go there, you're likely to find a diverse group of patients for your trials. The challenge, though, is that there are not many of those, and some of those individuals who are very interested in becoming investigators or participating in clinical trials don't really, well, there's a gap between the training or preparedness they have and what would make them acceptable to being invited to be an investigator certainly in a pharmaceutical related study. So I think some of the things that we're talking about here, the I'm In campaign, the outreach to just increase the awareness to all about the importance of clinical trials, the consideration of clinical trials, what is it that might motivate individuals to participate. And also, I guess I would add to that, undoing some of the historical trust issues that one cannot get away from that have led individuals to be very, very skeptical of anybody coming to them, asking them to, quote, experiment or use me as a guinea pig on them.
Do we find those historical, some of those background issues to be a barrier? And I guess, yes, let me answer my own question. Yes, how do we find our ways around that? Have you all discussed that? Maybe in messaging or?
Sure. For example, many people have heard about what happened in Tuskegee. Well, they've heard of Tuskegee. They may or may not know exactly what happened there. But I think in engaging credible voices of trust to work with the potential participants. I mean, organizations like the ones we have in National Minority Quality Forum, we mentioned the Association of Black Cardiologists, the National Medical Association. I mean, organizations or individuals or providers where there's already a trust factor. So you want to increase awareness, provide the education, and then try to move toward this behavioral change of increasing interest in participation. So the concerns are real. It's just that things have changed now.
Can I quickly add to that?
Dr.
Because we look into this issue and success factors during the dialogue that we were having as we establish. Certainly, the historical components are important, still there, particularly in certain community. But if you really look at the most recent data, including academic data, The number one problem is that either the patient doesn't have the information, or that information is extremely hard to find. And to me, that talks to a series of problems. Either the information is there, it's not in a simple language, it's not in the language that the patient speaks, or the doctor doesn't even have a conversation into that. So that lack of, in my opinion, awareness still, just look at the data, remain number one. And yes, in certain cases is misunderstanding of what clinical trials are. I think in terms of strategy to address them, of course, initiative like IMEAN created the tools, but these tools have to be used, and they are certainly not a substitute for having the appropriate communication with the patient. And we always think about the physician-patient relation, which I think remains crucial, but there are other important figures, like the trial coordinator, the nurses, some of which sometimes have like day-to-day interaction, with the patient even more than a physician. And again, creating incentive for education, for training, for even just devoting time to this figure, to me, it's absolutely critical to the success of this effort.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with respect to industry and getting involved and trying to rebuild that trust, I think where there's an opportunity to partner with a patient advocacy group that has kind of a strong presence within the community. For example, Michael J. Fox for Parkinson's Research, Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, Cystic Fibrosis. They serve a population that is very close to them. And so as opposed to industry coming and trying to recruit a patient to be active on a clinical trial as the big bad wolf, if you will, even though that they're not, having a patient advocacy group message about why it's important to be involved in clinical trials, why would it be okay to be involved in this clinical trial, using their relationships with the patients, with the community, and also the treating physicians at the institutions, I think goes a long way in facilitating participation in a clinical trial. And in lupus, with only one new drug approved in 54 years, and women and children and so on and so forth having to have 10 hip replacements because they've been on prednisone for 45 years or 30 years, I think the message is very easy. It's, we need you to participate. If you don't participate, the status quo is inertia, and we'll have a drug every 50 years. That's not good enough. And so I think it's a real educational thing to start get over those phobias and use where you can. I guess my suggestion is to industry is to use where you can a strong patient advocacy group to help you move that forward.
Great, and it looks like we have a lot of those bonds forming here even on this stage. I'm in Clinical Trial Awareness Week is coming up in a couple of weeks.
May 5th to 8th.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit more about some of the activities that you all are individually or collectively participating in? And this is such a great forum of soldiers who can take this message forward and let our networks know. What are some of the things you all are working on that we can get involved in?
So one of the things that we're beginning to focus on that I mentioned in the presentation is really engaging patients, caregivers, their advocates in the process. And even though some things are known, one of the steps that we're taking is beginning to work with organizations that are trust organizations to begin to actually do some additional surveys of patients about what would motivate them to participate in clinical trials. And sometimes there are things that you don't even think of. It seems important that you begin with an organization, an individual where there's trust, and then you do have to think about the logistics and the incentives to move beyond that. But there's one setting where it was pointed out to us that even just using of the term trial was a barrier to interest and created some suspicion. So I would say what we're beginning to do is to really try to engage, patients, their advocates, the caregivers, the community more to help guide us as to what really works in the different communities.
Anyone else?
So I would just like to say, one of the things that I think that we're doing is collaborating with our current investigators. I think some of the comments that you've all said is very critical, working with patient advocacies and giving them knowledge, but what we think is just working with our investigators and giving them the tools, because having worked at a site, mind you, it was a while ago, but one of the things that my physician told me, I was the only minority at his site, was how is it that patients are able to respond to you? Because I worked in an asthma and allergy clinic, so obviously, and I was like, we talked about it, but one of the things that he said to me is, I just can't seem to understand, but we're in a good area, it was in the Raleigh-Durham area, and I recruited at, definitely HBCUs and a lot of different areas, and I was able to recruit more minority patients than any other city coordinator, and he just did not understand it. So when we sat down and started having discussions, I explained to him what I was doing, and then I said, honestly, I was talking to my PI, I said, we need some more training here. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And that's where I think the prior panel talked about the cultural competency and the cultural sensitivity. And he's like, I don't understand why that would even be something I needed. And so I explained it to him to a situation that I thought was very critical. I remember one of the study coordinators coming into the room. She was with her patient, and she was extremely upset because the patient, we had to take a measurement of the patient. It's called a stadiometry, which you have to put it right flush to the children's head. And she asked the lady, a little African-American girl came in, and she had tons of wonderful, cute little ponytails in her head. I remember those days. And she wanted the lady to take her ponytails out so that she could measure her height. And she was upset because the lady was like, no. And she came and said, Karen, I don't understand. Would you go tell her why I need? And I said, first of all, maybe you need to understand that was probably a 2-3 hour process Sunday night.
Yes.
With that little girl that she fought with to get her hair done. And that hairdo has to work from Monday morning to school to Friday. And you want me to go in there and tell her on Tuesday she needs to take them out? That was a week worth of hairdo. Trust me, I remember those days. And so she was looking, she was like, a week? I was like, yes, that was Sunday night's hairdo, and it needed to last through the week. And so she said to me, she was like, wow. And so it was just something as simple as that. And so he was like, okay, good point, Karen. And so that's when we started to have those conversations. And while that may be very simple, but it's those types of things that you just don't know that seem to be parts of just everyday barriers.
And just to add to what Karen has said, there are also things in our processes, because if you're a large pharmaceutical company like Merck is, often you're a couple of steps removed. I mean, we don't even know who the patients are in our clinical trials, and there are legal and other reasons why you can't communicate them. So you work through the clinical research organizations and the coordinators, and we've always assume that they're the ones who are speaking to and know the patients. Right. But if they don't, or they're not going into certain communities, then you're not getting that result. So perhaps and one of the things we've been thinking about is perhaps part of the evaluation of those who are actually doing your studies is to include this, similar to what it sounds like you're doing at Pfizer, so that it's one of the check boxes. So I think if we add check boxes to these different places, then it'll be brought to attention and something will start to be done.
So planting the seed.
Yeah.
I think we had one question from the audience.
She's patiently waiting.
Right here. Dr. Alesci and a number of you have talked about collaborations and taking a page from other disease organizations. And as a kidney donor myself, I think those dots are very close, because my husband, who received the kidney, found out that many of the immune suppressives did not work on him. The clinical trials were done on extremely tall, white, Swedish men, and so that didn't work. So I think looking to organizations like Donate Life America, looking to organizations who are attempting to create a donor-friendly culture, clinical trials work with that. We don't just ask for tissue and eye and bone marrow and organs, we're asking for time as well. So I think any kind of a collaborative that bring those stakeholders together other organizations who meet the same obstacles in the communities that suffer the most. I think that's an excellent idea. I think Donate Life America and UNOS and other organ donor-specific organizations would be very interested in that kind of collaboration.
Thank you.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have been debating to raise my hand, but I'm one of the partners of I'm in campaign last year, and have been involved very much, into clinical trial for the last almost 15 years. So my comment it is that I'm in campaign is great. And we had the partnership with in campaign from the beginning because we, as a physician perspective, we are very much into educating our own physicians into that. But after listening to you all, and a few words caught my attention. It is first from you, Dr. Alesci, about having the campaign on every month, to remind people to keep the engagement going on, and for you about patient engagement. So it dawns on me that first that clinical trial is a science by itself. So that we have been using clinical trial as a part of a research team, a part of a project, either from pharma, from everyone. But so it doesn't have the continuity, neither keeping the momentum. It could be the momentum for us as providers, as physicians, as professionals, but it is not the momentum of the community at all, because they have to struggle on a daily life, on a daily basis. So we need to make it as a science by itself, something that we have the continuity to remind people on a daily basis to have that. It is not on and off, even the Army campaign is very successful of catching up this, but it goes down because we don't have a dedicated group, neither a budget, neither an energy that is really into the clinical trial. Because for me as a professional, it is a research perspective, but it's very different from the regular research, research, whatever we call academic research, because it involves, the medication, it involves many other, other groups into that, and the word trial itself, is very, very kind of difficult to understand. So that is my comments, to all of you about, that we might want to look into clinical trial from a kind of another angle, and make it, like example, like the American Diabetes Association, all these issues, by interest group, right? They have a dedicated organization that is on clinical trial, so that the continuity of the work of the education is there for the people. Thank you.
Thanks. If I very quickly, thanks for that comment as well as from the previous one. Perhaps just bringing together. I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's very easy for some of these initiatives actually related to big topics like this to have a lot of excitement, energy at the beginning, and then lose momentum. And actually, that's the worst thing that can happen, to be honest, because you just get 10 steps back. I made a couple of comments before. One, like, let's make it a national priority. I was almost trying to be provoking and say that, but I truly believe that. A comment that I didn't make is, but I made it the previous time, is not everybody is going to be a physician, a patient, or a clinical trial investigator, but we all at one point will be patients. So it's almost kind of selfish to do it, but we should do it. We already talked about partnership, but I think at the end of the day, perhaps the way to look at this, it's a social responsibility. It's a responsibility that each one of us should take for itself, for its family, for its relatives, but ultimately for the society. And I agree with the comment about keeping momentum. The question is how we do that. And perhaps it's as simple as having some community of practice of people that are really driving this. We try with with champions and so on. But I think if this doesn't become almost established in the social fabric, all the way from teaching in kindergarten about, I won't say clinical trial, but about active participation to health, to the point really, and I was serious, that each one of us on his driving license has an IMIN logo, the same way that he has a heart logo for donation. It's not going to happen. Exactly. And this takes each one of us. It's not just almost at the organizational level, but at the individual level. In an audience like this, where we have people that are really proactive, very passionate, but also influential in the different things that they do, I think it's almost up to each one of us, either being through Facebook or writing a letter to your congressman or whatever, to just make this a national priority, make this an individual priority, and think about the social responsibility that each one of us has to make it happen. I don't think there is anything else I can add and see as happening. We just build momentum, we catalyze it. This is already great, and I think we should celebrate where we are today, because there has been a lot of progress. But that's the only way that we have to keep momentum going. It's each one individually, not just as an organization, but as a member of a community, of a neighborhood, take that social responsibility upon itself or herself.
And I would add briefly to that this could be a really important moment in time. I mean, we know that the National Minority Quality Forum and the work that Gary's been doing has been highlighting this issue for a long time. But I think some of the other things that are occurring, we see now that the FDA is shining a spotlight on the issue, and even though they're not requirements, the spotlight is there. And what we don't have and what was not answered is, what does good look like? And if there are some metrics that we can begin to think about, or even, best practices to focus more on the solutions moving forward, this could be a very, very good time to do that.
Okay, with that, we're going to conclude today's panel. Thank you, Dr. Puckrin, and to the National Minority Quality Forum and the CBC Health Braintrust for this. Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there.
No problem. No problem.
I got a cue to end it, so let's go very quickly.
All right.
I'll risk it for you.
I'm Brian Bacot. I work in the Caribbean, have worked in Georgia, have worked in Florida, trained in the States. But I have the same problem that I find in the Caribbean. I cover a large area. I find the same problem I had in rural Georgia, rural Alabama, is that when you look at these clinical trials, pharma doesn't reach out to the real world. You reach out to researchers that are concentrated in what is announced up here as institutions, and these institutional researchers, who, and I'm not downing that in any way, but they have a select group of patients. These patients are filtered and pre-selected, and they're the worst of the worst, and they're the end result. And then they come to see me, and I take out their joints and give them brand new shiny ones. But the real problem is, just yesterday I'm seeing patients, and those patients come to me, and she has lupus, and I have nowhere to send her. I can't send her from this island to Florida, Georgia, to be treated and monitored on a regular basis. But and when you spoke about the using Stone Age tools to treat Star Wars type issues, we need to change from institutional methods to getting the institutions to be the vehicle for getting out to the community, such as the Virgin Islands. I mean, the Virgin Islands and Caribbean and other islands we are the feeder population for the larger cities, New York, Miami, California. I mean, we're the feeder population. You have a huge collection of a basis of genetic population and group that can be, for lack of a better term, studied to understand your population in New York. I guess my question has turned into more of a comment after the other two questioners, but I think we really need to find a way to reach out to the communities a little better and getting this data in population so we can see where the rubber hits the road and use those Star Wars type techniques to now treat these Stone Age diseases that we've been watching.
So maybe very quickly, because I realize we are out of time, but I think you put on the table a very important problem. It should be like research going to the community and not vice versa. And yes, we are facing the challenge of often doing the trial in the same places and so on. I guess there are a number of complexity around this, and we cannot discuss here for lack of time. But certainly, even just from a philosophical perspective, the point of care where you receive your care, your medical care, versus the one where you participate in a clinical trial could be the same way. And we have now tools to do this in an effective way. You shouldn't have patients flying to the NIH or any other place to do that. You shouldn't be disadvantaged if you live in a neighborhood where there is not the clinical trial in the backyard. I think, however, realistically speaking, this requires awareness, training, resource allocation, and again, a lot of things can be done in a virtual way and so on, but also require the right policies. Because a lot of these community hospitals and community physicians are already overwhelmed with the duties that they have to provide medical care. If they don't have the tools, but also they don't have the incentive to devote some of that time to, even just talking with a patient and referring to a trial, it's not going to happen. So it's a very important, I guess, issue to task, but the complexity goes all the way to, infrastructure to really policy incentives.
We're going to have to end it there, but I think that we end on a very strong note, knowing the work we have to do ahead. Can we give our panel applause one more time before we close out today? Thank you so much for this insightful discussion. Everyone have a great afternoon.